Hello students, and welcome to this lesson on the elements of literature. Today we will be recovering plot, conflict, character, theme, and setting, though today we're going to look more specifically at the different types of plots, characters, and conflicts. Now remember, you do need to take notes on this, and these notes will be checked at the beginning of class. Alright, let's begin. These are the Arizona state standards that we will be covering in this lesson today. These are our targets that we will be able to hit by the end of the lesson today. First, we can create interview questions and answer them as a character would. Second, we can support our answers with evidence from the book. Third, we can change the setting of a book and describe the new setting. Fourth, we can explain how the new setting would affect the rest of the book. Fifth, we can identify a theme in a novel. And sixth, we can discuss connections between related themes and books. Now, I know this is a lot of targets for a single lesson, but I've decided that we will put together a lot of the learning into a single lecture and then practice this throughout the next couple of weeks. So we won't be doing all of this all at one time, but you will, by the end of this set of lessons, have completed all of these targets. So please take a second and write down these targets on our goal sheet. This will also be checked when you first come to class during your next class period. Alright, I'd like to start out this lesson by defining these vocabulary words. By this point in the year, we've covered these words many times, so you should be pretty familiar with these terms. So I want you to pause this video and write down the definition of these words in your own words. This will also be checked at the beginning of next class. So go ahead and pause the video, write down your own definitions, and then we will continue. We'll start off with plot. Now there are two major types of plot, linear plot and nonlinear plot. Now as the name suggests, a linear plot is a plot that flows in a straight line. It flows in sequential order or chronological order. The events flow from one event to the next in the order that they really would have happened in a timeline. Now most stories tend to follow the linear plot. A nonlinear plot is the opposite. This is a plot that may deviate from sequential order. Stories with this often have jumps in time, flashbacks, or separate viewpoints entirely as the point of view switches between characters. One example of this is the Odyssey. The Odyssey starts in the very middle of the story with Odysseus, and then when he eventually gets to civilization, he begins telling his story from the very beginning, which comes to us as a flashback. So those are the two major types of plot. Now on to character. Now, two ways we can classify characters is either as a protagonist or an antagonist. A protagonist is the central character around which the story revolves. So this will be the main character. This is the one either telling the story or the one that we're focused on the most. Usually this character is the good guy, the hero, but that's not always the case. So for an example of a protagonist that isn't necessarily the good guy would be in the movie Megamind, which is told from the villain's perspective. Megamind is the villain and he's fighting against the hero, Metro Man. Now an antagonist is the person or force in opposition with the protagonist. So for my Megamind example, the antagonist would be Metro Man. Now, the antagonist is not always a person, sometimes it's a force. So for example, if a person is trying to survive in nature, nature would be the force in opposition with the protagonist. Now, it's not always easy to tell who is the protagonist and who is the antagonist in a story. So the easiest way to do this is to ask yourself two questions. First, who is this story mainly about? That's going to be your protagonist. Then ask yourself who or what is opposing that character. That will be your antagonist. In the Harry Potter books and films, the protagonist is Harry himself. I mean, his name is even in all of the titles. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, right? So he is going to be the protagonist. The person who mainly opposes him throughout all 7 or 8 is Lord Voldemort, right? The Dark Lord. So that would be the antagonist, the one opposing the main character. Another way to classify characters is as either a flat character or a round character. A flat character is a character in a story about which we have very little information. This is a character that is usually only used to provide a function or further the plot. They're the characters that jump in and out of the story without really having any sort of an impact. The other type of character is a round character. Now, this is a character in a story about which we have a lot of information. These characters are often considered three-dimensional. These are characters that we could really see living in the real world. And these are often the characters we connect with the most. So, for example, we have Nemo, right? He's a pretty round character. We know a lot about him. We know how he was born, how he lost all of his brothers and sisters, how he hurt his fin. We know that he wants to go to school, but his dad won't let him. So we understand him more. We have lots of information about who he is, where he's coming from. Bruce, on the other hand, we know very little about, except that he never knew his father, right? We know very little about Bruce. He's mainly used as a plot device to move the plot forward. He is just put into the story as a barrier for the characters to try and overcome. Two final ways we can categorize characters is as either a static character or a dynamic character. A static character is a character that stays the same over the course of a story. So this will be a character that from the beginning of the story to the end of the story doesn't change. They don't learn any lessons, they don't grow, they don't gain any new skills. They're pretty much exactly the same. On the other hand, a dynamic character is a character that changes over the course of a story. So this is the character that learns the lesson, that develops, that changes, that grows. These are the characters that we look for, and these are usually going to be the main characters in the story. For example, in Finding Nemo, Marlin is the dynamic character, right? He grows, he learns, he changes. At the beginning of the story, he won't let Nemo grow up. He won't let Nemo be adventurous, right? He's too overprotective. By the end of the story, he's met a turtle. He's gone on this great adventure, right? He's ready to let Nemo do his own exploring. On the other hand, we have a static character, right? Darla. Now, from the very beginning of the movie to the very end, she remains the girl who shakes bags and kills fishes. Like, there's no growth in her character at all. Moving on to conflict, there are actually many ways to divide conflict up. Now, the first major division would be between external conflicts and internal conflicts, which we have learned about before. Now, remember, external conflicts are the conflicts characters have with outside forces. Internal conflicts are going to be the conflicts they have within themselves. Now, external conflict can be divided into three major areas: man versus man, man versus nature, and man versus society. So in man versus man, this is a conflict in a story where characters are pitted against each other. So this is your typical one character fights another character. In man versus nature, this is a conflict in a story where characters are against an animal or a force of nature, right? So they're either trying to survive hurricanes or volcanoes or just survival in the wild with animals and cold, right? You also have man versus society. This is a conflict where characters stand against a man-made institution, or the government usually. Internal conflict doesn't actually break down into further categories, but it is often also called man versus self. And this is the conflict where the character struggles with themselves. So it's some sort of internal struggle against doing the right thing or making choices that the character has to overcome. A very clear example of man versus man would be when superheroes fight, right? So in this case, we have Iron Man and Thor fighting against each other. It's one man versus another man, physically competing. A great example of man versus nature would be found in the Game of Thrones, when Eddard Stark says, "Winter is coming." In this case, he's warning against the effects of winter, the cold, and the fact that there's no crops, and it's a very dangerous time where animals even become more dangerous. So he's warning against the dangers of nature itself. A good example of man versus society would be from the Hunger Games, where Katniss Everdeen isn't just fighting against her fellow tributes, but she's actually fighting against the society that enforces these games upon them. She's fighting against the capital and what they stand for and the control they have over all the people. So that would be man versus society. And finally, man versus self. Now, I don't feel like there's any character that truly encompasses man versus self quite like the Hulk, right? Where he has this internal conflict with himself about becoming this green monster. These are my citations, so we're at the end of the lesson. Please take a moment to look back over the video and complete your notes. Again, I will be checking for your notes, for our targets written on the goal sheet, and for your definitions of plot, character, conflict, theme, and setting. You will need to know these. We will be using them in activities in class. Thanks.